They say Antarctica is a wasteland, an uninhabited desert of ice, silent and white as a forgotten page. But how do we explain the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, that outlines the Antarctic coast not as a frozen expanse, but as a temperate landmass, ice-free, mapped with a precision modern science only matched after satellite imaging? How could a Turkish admiral, compiling ancient sources, depict a land no European was known to have seen, with topographical accuracy beneath miles of ice that science tells us has been there for over 6,000 years? Is it a coincidence, or the residue of a memory far older than civilization as we know it? Hidden beneath 2 miles of glacial silence, could Antarctica hold remnants of a lost epoch, of a world erased not by time, but by intent? This isn't a story about conspiracy. It is about forgetting. About how history curates our memory, trims the wild edges, seals doors that were never meant to be opened. But what if we cracked that ice? What if we allowed the silence to speak? Let us begin not with answers, but with doubt. Not with maps, but with questions that should never have been buried. Come closer. Follow the voice through the snowdrift. Historic sleep awaits. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Right now, I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. In 1958, during the height of the Cold War, a curious report was declassified by the United States Navy. It detailed seismic experiments conducted by a team of scientists participating in Operation Deep Freeze, a mission framed as a peaceful study of Antarctica. But buried in the technical jargon was an anomaly, low-frequency echoes that suggested voids, hollow pockets, beneath the thick ice sheet of Queen Maud Land. The official explanation offered geological caverns formed by thermal activity. But what kind of heat could carve chambers beneath an ice layer older than the last ice age? And why did the echoes return patterns, not chaos, as though rebounding from constructed symmetry? Years later, the same region would become the subject of another enigma, the so-called Lake Vostok magnetic anomaly. Under nearly 4 kilometers of solid ice, Lake Vostok lies entombed, a freshwater body untouched by sunlight for millions of years. Yet satellite magnetometry in the late 1990s revealed something deeply unsettling: a concentrated, geometric magnetic anomaly stretching across the lake's southern basin. The data showed an artificial regularity, straight lines, corners, a grid-like intensity that mimicked urban planning more than any known geological structure. NASA brushed it off as an error in the model. Russian scientists grew suddenly silent. And the United States, curiously, built a base alarmingly close, with classified infrastructure and no declared scientific purpose. But let us step back, not in distance, but in time. The 6th century Byzantine scholar Procopius, in his often dismissed Secret History, described lands beyond the Pillars of Heracles, encased in mists, inhabited not by beasts, but by watchers. He wrote of distant regions known only to the ancients, forbidden to common navigation. At first glance, his writing appears as metaphor, or perhaps delusion. Yet the phrasing mirrors older Mesopotamian and Egyptian fragments, which refer to the Southern Archive and the Land of First Light, places described not as myth, but as once real, later sealed by the veil of the sky gods, Could these be the same lands now buried beneath Antarctic frost? Why would unrelated cultures speak of a southern land harboring forbidden knowledge? And why did ancient Sanskrit texts, some over 3,000 years old, refer to Patala, a subterranean realm accessible only through remote polar gates, ruled by serpent-like beings with advanced crafts and luminous weaponry? The Mahabharata, a text otherwise preoccupied with dynastic wars and divine morality, dedicates curiously vivid detail to this realm's technology. Flying machines called vimanas, cities glowing without fire, and tunnels beneath oceans leading to icy thresholds. Again and again, the theme repeats. Something vast and forbidden lies south, beneath. Let us not fall into the temptation of fantasy. Instead, let us hold steady in ambiguity. Consider that in 1929, just before the discovery of the Piri Reis map, another map surfaced in fragments, drawn by Orontius Phineas in 1531. This one, too, depicts Antarctica's coastline, shockingly accurate, but with rivers flowing inland, unblocked by ice. Phineas claims to have drawn his map using ancient maritime charts no longer extant. Why would such charts exist in the first place? And why did so many of these ancient sources vanish entirely after their brief exposure to the Renaissance world? The ice itself tells its own story. Ice core samples drilled by Soviet and American teams over the decades have returned anomalies. Traces of pollen, spores, even particles of soot, evidence of forest fires in a place that today sustains nothing but microbial life. Geological surveys unearthed signs of ancient riverbeds, sedimentary deposits, and fossilized plant matter that could not exist under current climatic conditions. Antarctica, it seems, once lived. It breathed forests, hosted lakes, even perhaps civilizations lost to time, or perhaps erased by it. We must also ask, why was the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, so unusually unanimous among nations otherwise embroiled in conflict? Over a dozen countries, many of them geopolitical rivals, agreed to suspend all military activity, restrict access, and prohibit ownership claims on the continent. No other territory on Earth has ever been so swiftly and permanently locked away from exploration. Was this purely environmental altruism, or was it a silent acknowledgement of something beneath the ice that none dared confront? Even stranger, in 2016, then U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry made an unexpected solo trip to Antarctica during a peak diplomatic crisis. No clear reason was provided, and journalists were barred from the excursion. That same year, Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill also visited Antarctica, another unprecedented journey. What would a political leader and a religious figure seek in a realm of ice and silence? There is no smoking gun, only fragments, maps, muted seismic waves, fossils of flowers encased in permafrost, cryptic mythologies that speak in tongues older than stone. But when these fragments align, when a forbidden map, a Sanskrit tale, a Byzantine footnote, and a modern anomaly begin to whisper the same idea, it becomes harder to dismiss. Perhaps Antarctica is not simply a forgotten land, but an intentional absence in our collective memory, a place not just ignored, but veiled, hidden not only by nature, but by design. What, then, are we not meant to remember? If Antarctica was once free of ice, then what shattered its warmth and sealed it beneath a frozen tomb? The prevailing explanation speaks of continental drift, of slow tectonic migration and shifting climate patterns. But the data tells a story far more abrupt. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth entered a sudden climatic convulsion, the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plunged across the northern hemisphere in mere decades. Megafauna vanished, sea levels surged, human cultures regressed into silence. Something massive, unaccountable, and fast had struck the planet. And curiously, the same epoch marks the beginning of Antarctica's deep freeze. The Earth's axis itself seems to have tilted during this period, not a slow precession but a sudden wobble, a polar shift. The idea is controversial. And yet, records from ancient China, Sumer, and Egypt speak of the sun rising in the west and a world turned upside down. The Ipuwer Papyrus, a crumbling Egyptian scroll, describes fire in the sky, rivers flowing backward, and the stars being no longer in their places. Not myth, not metaphor. A memory, perhaps, misfiled as myth only because it did not fit into the neat drawers of academic comfort. This is where science begins to glance over its shoulder, where the seams between disciplines grow thin. Charles Hapgood, a Harvard-educated historian, proposed in 1958 a radical theory. Earth's crust could shift violently over its core, causing entire continents to move within days or weeks. He called it Earth crust displacement. Mainstream geologists dismissed it, yet Albert Einstein himself endorsed Hapgood's reasoning, calling it a logical hypothesis. If such a displacement occurred, it could explain why Antarctica, once temperate, mapped without ice, forested with flora now extinct, was suddenly plunged into an eternal winter. And if that shift did occur, what did it bury? At the center of these speculations lies a chilling alignment. Göbekli Tepe, the mysterious megalithic site in Turkey, dates to 11,600 years ago, coinciding precisely with the onset of the Younger Dryas. Its builders are unknown, its purpose unclear, yet its stone circles align to celestial patterns no longer visible from its latitude. They seem to mark stars as they were positioned not above Turkey, but from a southern pole that no longer exists in the same form. Is it possible that ancient cultures once tracked the sky not from today's polar alignments, but from a very different planetary orientation? And still, the spiral tightens. In 2013, scientists analyzing gravity anomalies from ESA's Göke satellite identified a massive, dome-like mass buried beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet. It lies near the Wilks land region, a geological scar thought to be the impact site of an enormous asteroid. But the data showed something even stranger. Not only a mass, but a symmetrical ring structure nearly 300 miles in diameter. Some speculate it's an impact crater. Others whisper of a buried structure. The mystery remains untouched, unreachable, too deep for drills, too dangerous for politics. And yet the myths persist. The Hopi, a Native American tribe with one of the oldest surviving oral traditions, speak of the ant people, beings who rescued humanity by leading them underground during the destruction of the previous world. The Zulu speak of the Chitauri, serpent-like overlords who came from the stars and taught mankind metalwork and war. In both accounts, these entities vanish beneath the earth, retreating to cold places beyond the mountains. Why do so many creation stories end with a retreat into ice? Even in the Judeo-Christian Apocrypha, the Book of Enoch describes the punishment of the fallen watchers. Cast from heaven for corrupting mankind, they are bound beneath the earth in desolate places of frost and void, where no sun may touch them. These are not the vague fires of hell, but rather places that sound eerily Antarctic in character. The connection may seem distant until we remember that ancient texts often encoded truths not in direct statements, but in echoes. Echoes like the ones recorded by sonar beneath the ice. Echoes like the repeating EM patterns once picked up near Lake Vostok, dismissed as instrument error, then silenced by budget cuts. Perhaps the deeper the ice, the louder the silence. We are taught that civilization began in Mesopotamia, that everything before is darkness. But what if civilization didn't begin? It restarted. What if the flood myths found in over 200 cultures, Sumerian, Hindu, Norse, Mesoamerican, all point not to mere coincidence, but to a global erasure? Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, names we are told are fantasy. But when Plato described Atlantis, he claimed his information came from Egyptian priests who kept their histories not in myth, but in stone. He wrote that Atlantis was real, that it existed beyond the pillars of Heracles, and that it was buried in a single day and night of catastrophe. And then, silence. Modern scholars argue Plato invented the story to illustrate philosophical ideals. But why then the astonishing geographical detail? Why the emphasis on a real, measurable location? Could Antarctica be the true memory of Atlantis, misplaced, misunderstood, misnamed? It would explain the silence, the urgency of the Antarctic Treaty, the refusal to allow deep exploration, the geopolitical neutrality in a world otherwise addicted to conquest. It would also explain the rush of classified expeditions in the mid-20th century. Operation High Jump in 1946 deployed over 4,000 military personnel, warships, aircraft, to a land declared uninhabited. The mission was meant to last months. It ended abruptly after just 2 weeks. Admiral Richard Byrd, leading the expedition, later gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper where he stated, cryptically, that the U.S. must prepare to defend against flying craft capable of reaching the poles at incredible speeds. The interview was buried. Byrd was recalled, and the world moved on. But the ice remained. There are moments when knowledge does not disappear. It is entombed, locked not behind ignorance, but behind intentional forgetting. We laugh at the notion of lost civilizations, but we accept without question that humans suddenly learned architecture, astronomy, and agriculture in a blink of evolutionary time. We dismiss the possibility that we inherited knowledge from a people now gone, yet we cannot explain how the pyramids were aligned so precisely with Orion's belt, how ancient Sanskrit encoded the speed of light, how Dogon tribes described Sirius B before telescopes existed. We cannot explain, or we refuse to remember. So, once again, we return to the ice, not just as a physical veil, but as a symbol. Antarctica is not merely a continent. It is a vault, a wound, a blankness so total that it dares us to look away. But what happens if we keep looking? What if the answers are not under the ice, but behind the silence? It begins with a stone, not in Antarctica but far north, nestled in the Peruvian Andes. The Siuhte monolith, a carved block of granite nearly 4 meters long, etched with intricate channels, basins, and stair-like ridges. No writing, no iconography, no known language, just flow paths, as if designed to control water or to model terrain. Archaeologists call it a hydraulic map, though no consensus exists on its function. But the surface isn't random. The grooves mimic landscapes not found in Peru, not in South America at all, but eerily resemble topography observed in recent satellite scans of buried Antarctic valleys beneath the ice sheet, long-forgotten river networks frozen under time. How would a pre-Columbian artifact echo the hidden anatomy of a continent no ancient people supposedly visited? The shapes are not perfect replicas, but in the same way, a child's sketch captures the essence of a face. There is recognition, a whisper of familiarity, as if memory traveled not through boats, but through dream. And dreams in the old traditions were more than sleep. The Aboriginal elders of Australia speak of the dream time not as a myth, but as a temporal layer where past, present, and potential overlap. In some of their oldest stories, there is mention of ancestors who came from the south, across lands now drowned by ocean or transformed by snow. They brought the light of the sky, carved stone with fingers, and left when the cold wind broke the sky open. These tales have no dates, but the knowledge in them, the constellations, the cycles of climate, the extinction of animals, points to memories stretching beyond the last ice age. Could oral tradition preserve echoes of a world that predates our own? Modern anthropology scoffs, and yet linguistic dating techniques now confirm that some Aboriginal languages contain continuous usage patterns older than 50,000 years. The oldest human memory, perhaps, locked not in books, but in breath. And again they point south, toward lands now silent. Silence has texture if you listen closely. In 2001, NASA's Ice Bridge mission recorded gravitational anomalies over West Antarctica. One particular zone near the Bentley Subglacial Trench returned density readings inconsistent with any known geological formation. Deep radar scans revealed rectangular depressions, hundreds of meters wide, perfectly aligned. Nature does not favor straight lines on this scale. The images were quietly archived. Funding was redirected. The press release used vague language, unexpected formations, subject to further analysis. Why the reluctance to speculate? Because speculation, in this context, opens doors that lead to rooms we are not supposed to enter. We believe ourselves to be the pinnacle of civilization. But what if we are only the latest bloom on a tree whose roots stretch beyond recorded history? The philosopher-mystic G.I. Gurdjieff once proposed that humanity suffers from historical amnesia, a forgetting so deep that we mistake the flicker of our present for the light of permanence. He spoke of a cycle, of epochs rising and falling like breaths, each one believing it is the first to speak. Antarctica, then, becomes more than a location. It becomes a symptom, a stillness too absolute, a gap in the narrative so vast that it stains the rest of the story. And here's a thought that lingers like a cold breath. If there was a civilization before ours, if it knew the stars, built monuments, mapped the earth, what would have destroyed it? The mythic flood is not a tale unique to any one culture. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a deluge that wiped away the cities of men. Hindu texts speak of pralaya, cosmic dissolution through flood, fire, and ice. The Norse Ragnarok ends in submersion, only for a new world to rise. Even the Inca recall Pachacuti, a time when the world is overturned, swallowed, and reborn. And what triggers these cycles? In the last decade, scientists have turned toward the possibility of a celestial cause, the Tau Ceti debris stream, the sun's magnetic excursions, and perhaps most compelling, the discovery of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Evidence of platinum-rich microtectites found across North America, Greenland, and parts of Europe suggests a comet impact, or multiple, around 12,800 years ago. The same window as the polar shift, the same window as the Antarctic freeze, The same window as the disappearance of megafauna and the abrupt collapse of cultures we now consider primitive, yet who built observatories aligned to the heavens. Could such an impact have struck an advanced society? And if so, would its remnants not scatter across the globe? They do, but they are not recognized as such. Megalithic sites defy explanation. Sacsayhuaman in Peru, stones the size of cars, fitted together without mortar, surviving earthquakes that decimated colonial structures nearby. The Osirian in Egypt, submerged foundations older than dynastic pyramids. Baalbek in Lebanon, a platform of stones weighing over 800 tons, cut and moved with techniques still unknown. All share common traits: unknown builders, astronomical alignments, and mythologies that attribute them to the gods or the stars. But perhaps these were not gods. Perhaps they were survivors, remnants of a world erased by ice and time. Perhaps they fled south. And perhaps they left something behind, beneath the growing snows of a land that once knew sunlight, forests, and fire. Which brings us, slowly, inevitably, to a troubling question. What if Antarctica is not just a place where something was buried, but a place built to bury? If you wished to hide the last memory of a lost world, where better than a continent encased in miles of shifting, uninhabitable ice? A vault guarded by nature itself. A continent forbidden by international law, inaccessible to the masses, patrolled by treaties, sealed by climate. A continent whose maps once showed it green, but now show it white. And perhaps that color change is not just an accident of climate. Perhaps it is the color of erasure. So we stand at the edge again, peering into a wind that screams without sound. Each piece fits loosely, like frost-bitten fingers trying to grasp a shape they once knew. We have no conclusions, only fragments, echoes, questions buried in permafrost and sealed in silence. But isn't it curious how silence always hums just before something speaks? There is a phrase found carved into the lintel of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi: "Know thyself," a riddle masquerading as wisdom. But what if this ancient injunction wasn't philosophical at all? What if it was geographical, literal? What if to know ourselves we must remember not who we are, but where we were before the forgetting? And what if that memory, long eroded from stone and blood, is not lost but simply entombed in ice? In 2018, scientists drilling near Dome C in East Antarctica retrieved ice core fragments dating back over 800,000 years. Within those crystalline tubes were not only trapped air bubbles but traces of volcanic ash, pollen, even microscopic diatoms, organisms normally found in temperate, shallow waters. Not drifting on wind, embedded deep. Some were genetically unfamiliar, life forms without full lineage, as though belonging to a branch of evolution that veered off in isolation. Was this just ancient climate anomaly, or residue from an ecosystem long vanished, compressed under the weight of silence? Just beyond Dome C lies a strange topographical depression, measured first in 1974 by airborne radar. It defies explanation. Not the basin of an ancient lake, not a crater, but something sharper, more symmetrical, with angular ridges buried beneath miles of glacial layering. A forgotten foundation? A sunken monument? The radar data remains incomplete. Further flights were canceled, no further studies published. The silence was not scientific, it was bureaucratic. There are patterns if you dare to follow them. In 1994, a classified U.S. Navy reconnaissance satellite passed over the Gamburtsev Mountains, a range entirely submerged beneath Antarctic ice. What it found should have sparked an avalanche of inquiry. Anomalies in infrared scans, heat signatures too uniform, too regular, too linear to be natural. The report was quietly shelved. Only a redacted abstract ever surfaced, citing thermal irregularities potentially caused by geothermal phenomena. Yet internal memos leaked in 2003 hinted at possible subglacial structures inconsistent with known geology. Structures. The word hung in the cold like breath. But of course, it wasn't followed up. Because to acknowledge structure is to acknowledge design. And design implies intent, and intent implies memory. Across the world, indigenous myths hint at a race of memory keepers, beings or ancestors who built, encoded, and then retreated when the world shifted. The Maori speak of the Urukehu, pale visitors who came from the frozen south. The Dogon speak of the Nomo, serpent beings who lived in cold water and taught geometry and speech. The Norse whisper of Jotunheim, the land of frost giants beyond the known world who once shared the secrets of Yggdrasil before retreating into the void. Different names. Same story. A knowledge that emerged, seeded, then withdrew, disappearing beneath ice, myth, and ridicule. Even the Greeks, so often idealized as the cradle of reason, echoed this descent. In Plato's Timaeus, he writes of a conversation between Solon and an Egyptian priest, who said, "You Greeks are like children. You have no old stories, no ancient memory." The Egyptians, in turn, claimed to preserve records from a time before the flood, stories older than pyramids, older than the Nile, older than time. Where did those stories come from? We live in a world of linear timelines, one dawn, one history. But the earth doesn't move in lines. It spirals, tilts, precesses. It forgets and remembers and forgets again. The Hindu concept of yugas describes time not as a river, but a wheel, ages of light and darkness, repeated endlessly. In the Mayan long count, time loops through Baktuns, vast cycles of rise and ruin. What we call prehistory may not be the beginning, but a reboot. And if so, then the ice is not our origin, but our reset. Reset by what? The magnetic field of Earth, once thought to be a constant, has shown signs of erratic movement. Magnetic poles drift faster now. Reversals, once believed to occur every few 100,000 years, have, in fact, happened in less than 10,000. During such shifts, the protective shield of Earth weakens, cosmic radiation increases, atmospheric chaos ensues, species vanish, memory is erased, not by censorship, but by extinction. And then there is the possibility of an external trigger. The binary star hypothesis, an old and unfashionable model, suggests our sun may once have had a dark twin, Nemesis, a companion star on an elongated orbit, returning every 26 million years to scatter comets from the Oort cloud toward Earth. There is no consensus, only patterns, spikes in extinction events, craters beneath the ocean floor, fractures in ancient memory. One such impact, some believe, set the ice in motion and buried the truth under Antarctica's rising crust. We are taught to fear the fantastical, to scoff at Atlantis, at ancient astronauts, at lost continents, not because they lack evidence, but because they fracture the mirror. They demand we stop seeing ourselves as unique. They demand we admit we are not the first. And if we are not the first, what responsibility do we have to remember? It is no longer a question of speculation. It is a question of intention. Why was Admiral Byrd's post-high jump interview so swiftly discredited? Why are we not allowed to independently explore the central Antarctic plateau? Why are satellite images of certain coordinates redacted or blurred, unlike any other region on Earth? Why, in an age obsessed with data, do we allow one continent to remain unknowable? Perhaps because we fear what memory reveals. Perhaps because buried beneath Antarctica is not just a ruin, but a mirror. And what if, when we finally look into it, we see not gods, not aliens, not monsters, but ourselves? Ourselves from before. In 1838, Captain Jules Dumont d'Urville, a French explorer driven by obsession rather than duty, landed on the frozen shores of what would later be named Adelie Land. His journals, often overlooked by modern historians, described not just the landscape, but something stranger. Shadows that move across the horizon, where there should be none, and ridges beneath the ice that ring like stone under hammer. It was written off as frost-bitten delusion. But what if the captain hadn't lost his senses, but had merely stepped too close to the edge of the veil? We are told that the ice is impassable, but the satellite records say otherwise. Over the last 2 decades, satellite-borne LiDAR systems, designed to map surface elevation, have revealed subtle undulations beneath Antarctica's surface that are too regular, too precise. Buried near the Shackleton Range is what some researchers have called the ridge pattern. 5 parallel lines, each over 2 miles long, evenly spaced, with 90-degree intersections beneath the ice. Geological formations do not follow right angles on this scale. Nature curves, chaos spirals. These are the marks of decision, of design. Yet no scientific paper dares to say it outright. The language folds in on itself. Words like anomaly, inexplicable, requires further study. They are placeholders for what cannot be confessed. The structure does not belong to this epoch, perhaps not even to this species. Still, the silence grows heavier. From the sky, Antarctica is a map of forgetfulness. White and wide, offering no entry, no promise of return. But from below, from the cracks and sounds that echo upward, there is a rhythm. Glaciologists have recorded what they call cryoseismic events, deep tremors, subglacial rumbles that pulse at regular intervals. Some occur every 8 minutes, others every 36 hours. They resemble neither tectonic shifts nor glacial movement. Instead, they resemble mechanical rhythm, like the heartbeat of something buried and waiting. And we must ask, what machine runs under ice for thousands of years? What clockwork persists when all else has turned to dust? The answer may not lie in the present, but in the architecture of ancient time. Let us drift now to the Nazca lines, etched into the arid plains of southern Peru. These enormous geoglyphs, visible only from the sky, include spirals, arrows, and long runways that extend toward horizons empty of cities. For years, archaeologists suggested they were ritual pathways. But when overlaid with global cartographic data, some of the longest lines point, not to the Andes, not to the Amazon, but south, impossibly south, toward Antarctica. More curiously still, these alignments match locations beneath the ice where magnetic anomalies have been recorded. What mind drew lines in the desert pointing to a continent they could not have seen? And it is not just Peru. Across the world, in Cambodia's Angkor Wat, in Stonehenge, in Easter Island's Moai statues, we find not just alignments to the stars, but orientations that point toward now buried nodes in the southern hemisphere. Could these sites have once belonged to a planetary grid? An ancient system of energy, memory, or movement, shattered by catastrophe, buried beneath sediment and skepticism? The myths suggest so. The Polynesians speak of Hiva, a sunken homeland of gods, lost beneath the waves after a great upheaval. The Tamil Sangam literature speaks of Kumari Kandam, a vast land south of India, swallowed by the ocean, where civilization flourished before history. In both cases, the lands were not metaphor, but memory. Repeating again, the south, the ice, the loss. And now, even our science catches up, quietly. In 2020, researchers at the British Antarctic Survey published findings on a chain of heat sources beneath the Antarctic crust. They called it unexpected geothermal flux, a poor phrase for something that stretches in a line, like an ancient fault, or perhaps a buried power corridor. One segment passed directly beneath Lake Vostok, another beneath the Gamburtsev Mountains. All of them silent. But heat rises. And where heat rises, so too does possibility. What if what lies below is not ruin, but hibernation? This is not merely speculation. In 2004, Russian scientists drilled into Lake Vostok and recovered a bacterial strain never before seen on Earth. It survived in total isolation, in darkness, under pressure that would crush a submarine. It metabolized not light or oxygen, but sulfur and heat. It should not exist, and yet it does. Now imagine, not bacteria, but sentience, something ancient, built for endurance, not speed. Something that sleeps, not dies. Something that waits. Could consciousness persist in another form? Crystalline? Electromagnetic? Machine? The Book of Enoch, long excluded from canonical scripture, speaks of the Watchers, entities cast into the depths for sharing forbidden knowledge. They were bound beneath the mountains of ice, in the land no man may tread. Ancient nonsense, or veiled recollection? Even the Quran refers to Iram of the Pillars, a city of great height, destroyed and buried, hidden where none may find it again. Some scholars now suggest that the city of pillars could be a metaphor for something else, perhaps even literal columns of ice? And then there is the recurring image found across cultures, wheels within wheels, rotating within the earth. In Ezekiel, in Tibetan mandalas, in the spirals of Irish megaliths. They are not art. They are not abstraction. They are memory. What if Antarctica is not just the end of the world, but its center? What if, beneath that white silence, turns the last forgotten machine of a previous Earth? And more disturbingly, what if it begins to stir? The wind in Antarctica doesn't speak. It whispers, not in words, but in frequencies, subsonic pulses that move beneath human hearing, carried across glaciers in long, endless murmurs. Scientists call them infrasound, the result of shifting ice and katabatic winds. But sometimes, amid that low, droning monotony, there are patterns, structured pulses, repeating tones that seem timed, almost melodic. Instruments designed for seismic detection have captured these rhythms for decades, yet no one asks why some frequencies repeat like breath, like language. The data is there, but silence is safer than inquiry. In 2002, a team of researchers from the Alfred Wegener Institute was surveying ice thickness near Dome Fuji when their instruments registered a brief, perfectly geometric vibration, a tone that echoed back not as noise, but as a signature. It lasted only 6 seconds. then nothing. Their report, when published, excluded the anomaly. One scientist later admitted, off record, that they'd detected a signal, but it didn't belong to any known source. When asked what it resembled, he said simply, "It sounded deliberate. We dismiss such things because we've been trained to. The line between science and myth is guarded fiercely, not because it's thin, but because it threatens to collapse entirely. And yet, across traditions, across civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, there are echoes of a truth long buried. The earth once spoke, and then it was silenced. Not metaphorically, literally. The Hopi elders recall a time when the heart of the world beat aloud, and the ground hummed songs to the sky. The Vedic texts describe anahata nada, the unstruck sound, the cosmic vibration present in all things. The Sumerians spoke of me tablets that contained not writing, but tones, resonant codes that shaped reality. Even the Egyptian temple walls whisper of sefech abwi, the measuring of chords, not geometry, but vibrational mapping of the earth itself. And then came the flood, or the fire, or the fall. Whatever it was that shattered that resonance left behind more than ruins. It left scars in frequency, places where silence is too deep, too total. And Antarctica, more than any other place on Earth, is a silence so vast it vibrates. Modern science has begun, reluctantly, to trace the edges of this forgotten field. Quantum resonance, acoustic levitation, cymatics, the study of how sound forms matter into geometry. When high-frequency tones are played into fine sand on a flat surface, they form perfect shapes, spirals, hexagons, mandalas. The higher the tone, the more complex the shape. Ancient symbols, once believed to be purely decorative, are now understood to be visual representations of sound. So when we find petroglyphs in the Andes that match those carved into rock near Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, symbols that predate agriculture, do we ask who copied whom, or what source they were both listening to? Some argue that early civilizations were not builders, but listeners, that the first structures weren't shelters or shrines, but resonators. Tuning chambers, receivers of the Earth's frequency. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, is not aligned merely to cardinal points. It's built on the precise harmonic ratio of 2-1, 3-2, and 5-3, ratios found not just in music, but in atomic structure, in planetary orbits, and in LiDAR scans of buried ridges beneath Antarctic ice. Coincidence? Or harmonic memory? Consider the Antarctic ice domes, strange, smooth mounds rising from the plateau, like frozen echoes of something once pulsating below. They are symmetrical. Some are perfectly circular. Underneath, radar reveals chambers, voids, and what one 1977 Soviet report cautiously described as catenary formations unlikely to result from glacial pressure. That is, arches, like the ceilings of cathedrals, like rib cages of old gods, structures built not to survive time, but to endure resonance. But what were they meant to receive? In 1965, during the Cold War's most secretive years, a joint U.S.-British project known as Project Iceworm attempted to build military tunnels beneath Greenland's ice sheet. While officially a weapons deployment test, transcripts later revealed another purpose: subsurface acoustic mapping. The objective? To detect hidden frequency anomalies that could indicate underground structures. Declassified documents reference Antarctica multiple times as a control region where the purest earth tones could be sampled. Why? because it is the only continent untouched by modern noise. What did they hear there? No answers. Only omissions. Only missing days in the logs. But in 1971, a short-lived scientific paper emerged from a Norwegian expedition to Dronning Maud Land. It proposed the existence of harmonic wells under Antarctica, zones where natural Earth resonance amplifies exponentially. The paper was retracted weeks later. Its author vanished from public life. But a translated line from his notes remains, passed between private archives. The tone is constant, but not natural. It repeats like a chant. It is not ours. Not ours. So then, whose? There is an ancient Egyptian story, rare, cryptic, of the Shetayet, the chamber beneath the earth where the first tone was stored. It was said to be guarded by silence, accessed only by those who walk backwards through time. Scholars dismiss it as mystical allegory, but the word Shetayet itself shares linguistic roots with Shet, the root for hidden, and Ta meaning land. Hidden land. Hidden tone. The Book of the Dead describes the Shetayet as a place where one hears not with ears, but with bones. A place where the dead remember the music of before. Now consider what modern bioacoustics has revealed. That our very bones conduct sound. That deep vibrations travel through marrow long after the ears fail. That even the deaf can feel music when it is low enough. The resonance is not outside us, it is within. Memory, then, may not lie in archives, but in resonance, in how we vibrate when we stand in certain places, or when we sleep near certain frequencies. What if the memory of the first world is not lost, but waiting to be reawakened in us? What if Antarctica is not just the tomb of an ancient civilization, but the instrument it left behind? And the question that follows, quiet and inevitable, is this: what happens when the tone begins again? There is a desert in Namibia called the Namib, one of the oldest in the world. Across its red dunes lie strange circular patches of land, bare, lifeless, arranged with eerie regularity. They are called fairy circles. For decades, scientists argued over their cause: termites, gas emissions, fungal colonies. But no explanation fits all cases, and similar patterns have been found as far as Australia. Then, in 2014, a satellite imaging study noted something chilling. When mapped globally, some of these formations aligned along a long-forgotten arc, a curve that, if extended southward across the oceans, pointed directly at Antarctica's Queen Maud Land. An arc or a signal path? Patterns, always patterns. The more we search, the more we find not noise, but intent. The world we thought was accidental begins to pulse with something older, more deliberate. And when we look to Antarctica, we are not just looking at ice, but at the gravitational heart of the planet. A landmass centered near the South Pole, around which every ocean circulates, every wind curls, every magnetic current loops. It is the eye of the storm that we call Earth. And eyes are made for seeing, but perhaps some are made for watching. In 1957, the Soviet Union built a base called Vostok Station, situated near the geomagnetic South Pole. It was, officially, a research outpost for studying auroras and magnetic fields. Unofficially, the logs from its early years contain repeated references to nocturnal pulses, shifts in local magnetic alignment that occurred at 3:33 a.m. and 4:44 a.m., recurring over multiple lunar cycles. The notes mention interference with radio signals, spontaneous equipment failure, and, most curiously, dream disturbances among the crew. One entry, scrawled in the margins of a maintenance log, reads, "The dreams are not mine. I wake up afraid of a shape I don't remember. Dreams. Again, the boundary between psychology and frequency blurs. Could Antarctica be influencing not just instruments, but thought? The Global Consciousness Project, a long-running study based on random number generators placed around the world, noted a consistent anomaly. Every time the generators passed closest to Antarctica on their satellite orbit, the deviation from randomness increased. Subtly, but consistently. It was as if something beneath the ice was thinking. Not with neurons, but with pattern, with probability, with presence. Ancient cultures believed that certain places held consciousness, mountains, rivers, caves. Sacred not because of superstition, but because they listened back, responded. The Aboriginal people believed that the land sings, literally. That each rock, each hill, has a song line. A vibrational memory encoded in the ground. To walk across it was to awaken it. Now imagine a place where all the song lines converge. Imagine a continent carved not by glaciers but by silence, with each ridge, valley, and dome acting as a resonant chamber. Not a landmass, but a body, a brain, a machine of memory. And then, remember that we've only seen its surface. In 2013, European Space Agency satellites captured radar readings of what they labeled linear ridges buried beneath East Antarctica. The ridges ran for hundreds of miles, evenly spaced, uninterrupted by natural features. They were quickly dismissed as fossilized plate boundaries, a convenient placeholder. But one geologist from the University of Bergen argued quietly that the pattern resembled motherboard architecture, a planetary circuit board, scaled to an impossible degree. And that same year, across the world, a strange spike in Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural background frequency, was recorded. It pulsed at 783 Hz, then jumped suddenly, spiking above 8.6 Hz. For just over 6 minutes, something changed. And it happened during the Antarctic winter, when the sun never rises and everything is still. What if the two events weren't separate? What if a buried system had activated? It is tempting to leap into science fiction. Machines beneath the ice, lost civilizations whose technology transcended time. But perhaps the truth is stranger than that. Not alien, not human, but something older than both. Something born not of metal, but of resonance. Not of circuits, but of stone and field and sound. We are quick to dismiss ancient legends that speak of Earth as a living being. But modern science is circling back, slowly. The Gaia hypothesis, once fringe, now shapes ecological theory. Earth as a self-regulating organism. But what if it's more than that? What if the Earth is not only alive, but aware? And Antarctica, its mind. Many indigenous traditions describe the poles not just as places of cold, but as places of birth. In Inuit cosmology, souls enter and exit the world through the north and south. In Tibetan myth, Shambhala, the hidden realm of enlightenment, is accessed through polar gateways. Even in early Christian mysticism, texts refer to the white throne at the edge of the world, where angels descend to record the thoughts of men. What if these are all different words for the same concept? What if beneath the Antarctic ice lies the threshold, not to another place, but to another mode of being? We continue to send probes into space, build telescopes to see the edges of the universe, collide particles to chase the beginning of time. But perhaps the greatest secret is not out there, not in the stars, but under our feet. Sealed in cold, waiting, watching. And maybe, just maybe, we were never meant to remember. Because memory is power. And power demands responsibility. And if we are not ready, if we are not capable of integrating what we once were, what we once touched, then perhaps forgetting was mercy. But now, in our arrogance, we approach the threshold again. With satellites, with drills, with curiosity sharpened by ancient hunger. And so we arrive at the question the ice has been asking all along. What will you do when it begins to answer back? In 1938, under the veil of political distraction and rising war, the Third Reich launched an expedition to Antarctica. It was called the Schwabenland Expedition, and while the public explanation framed it as a whaling research mission, internal documents, later uncovered in fragments, told a stranger story. Ships left Hamburg carrying not just crew, but geologists, architects, and electromagnetic specialists. Aircraft aboard the vessel. Schwabenland made hundreds of survey flights over Queen Maud Land, dropping aluminum darts marked with the swastika, staking silent claims. But it was what they didn't bring back that raised the first questions. They returned with no biological samples, no detailed climate logs, no cartographic data made public. Instead, reports vanished into closed archives. And within months, Germany shifted its attention elsewhere, as if its eyes had been opened, and then swiftly shut again. But some whisper that they found something. Not gold, not oil, but an echo. A harmonic presence beneath the ice, something old and still active. In the years that followed, rumors flourished of secret bases, of post-war hideouts, of hidden technology buried in tunnels warmed by geothermal vents. Most of it descended into myth, distorted by propaganda and conspiracy. But one detail remained consistent across versions: that something beneath the ice had been awakened, or at least observed. We don't need myths to find the strangeness, we only need coordinates. In 2016, satellite imagery of Wilks land revealed a gravitational anomaly beneath the ice, measured at over 300 kilometers wide. The official line, perhaps a massive impact crater, but when overlaid with magnetic data, a clearer picture emerged. The anomaly was not circular, but hexagonal. A six-sided shape embedded deep in the crust, identical in proportion to hexagonal waveforms found in sonic harmonics and crystalline resonance patterns. Nature favors the spiral, the curve, the fractal. But the hexagon, it is the shape of containment, the bee's hive, the Saturn storm, the seal. So the question rises, unspoken. Was something sealed beneath the ice? And if so, who sealed it? The Dogon people of Mali, long ridiculed for their claims of astronomical knowledge, have always spoken of Nomo, ancestral beings who came from the Sirius system and descended into the waters after sharing knowledge with humankind. They left, the story goes, not by dying, but by retreating into the Earth's deepest memory. Some elders claim these beings were not from above, but from before, and that Sirius was not their origin, but a later mask. The Hopi tell of Kaskara, a land of peace destroyed by fire and water, whose people fled underground before emerging again into the world we know. The Sanskrit Mahabharata speaks of aerial craft and cities that moved across the sky, destroyed by great celestial weapons. Each story ends the same way, with withdrawal, with survivors who retreat, not to another planet, but to hidden places of ice and silence. This pattern is not linear. It is ritual, a cycle of emergence, guidance, catastrophe, and concealment. And now, perhaps, the seal grows thin. Consider the strange behavior of Earth's magnetic poles. For centuries, they drifted slowly, imperceptibly. But since the late 1990s, the North Magnetic Pole has accelerated its movement, shifting rapidly toward Siberia. The South Pole, too, drifts along the Antarctic coast, drawn subtly toward the Wilks anomaly. Scientists offer no clear reason. Magnetic reversals have occurred before, yes, but never with such speed. What if this isn't drift? What if it's response? In 2023, researchers aboard a French Antarctic mission detected a sudden, unexplainable fluctuation in the upper ionosphere directly above East Antarctica. For 8 minutes, there was a burst of high-frequency resonance, accompanied by localized atmospheric compression and auroral activity. The report was buried, filed as instrumental interference. But one audio technician leaked the raw recording to an independent lab. The waveform, when sonified, produced a series of tones, chords. Not noise, music. What kind of earth sings in chords? What intelligence lies dormant beneath a surface that hums in harmony? And what awakens it? Time itself may be complicit. In his work on geological deep time, philosopher Manuel de Landa suggests that time is not a line, but a sediment. It builds, compresses, layers of memory buried so deep they cease to be recognized as memory. They become geology. What we call stone may once have been sound, dream, or warning. And perhaps Antarctica is the deepest sediment of all, a place where time itself has stopped, not metaphorically, but physically. Ice cores reveal that beneath 3 miles of glacier, organic decay has slowed to near stasis, particles of pollen and ash perfectly preserved. Even viruses, frozen for millennia, still viable. Memory here is not eroded. It is entombed. Preserved not by accident, but by design. Could this be the purpose of the ice? Not a disaster, but a choice. To lock away something too powerful, too dangerous, too advanced, or perhaps too sacred. Something that could not be destroyed, only silenced. Something whose frequency could once alter stone, bend light, shape consciousness. And now, in our age of excavation and curiosity, we chip away at the shell. Drills bore deeper, satellites see farther, algorithms decode faster. The ice thins, the veil lifts. And we must ask, what will we find beneath? Ruins? Technology? Or something stranger? Something that remembers? Because if what sleeps beneath Antarctica is not merely artifact but conscious design, then discovery becomes contact. And contact, once initiated, cannot be undone. So the final question for now. Quiet, urgent, unblinking. Are we waking something, or is it waking us? In 2004, a team of glaciologists working near the Transantarctic Mountains encountered something they couldn't explain. Their radar instruments, designed to measure ice thickness, returned an absence. Not a void, not rock, but an area where signals failed entirely, absorbed without reflection, as though the ice itself had become a wall. They tried again, adjusted the frequency, and still, nothing. A silence deeper than stone. Later, that section of their report was redacted. The official explanation? Instrumental malfunction due to extreme environmental conditions. But one technician wrote, anonymously, in a message that never made it to publication. It was like the ice swallowed our signal, not bounced it, not blurred it, swallowed it. What kind of silence consumes waves? The ancient Gnostics spoke of a boundary at the edge of the material world, a membrane between the seen and unseen. They called it horos, a limit not of space, but of perception, a veil that could not be pierced with eyes or tools, but only with remembrance. If Antarctica is a place on Earth where memory is preserved, not only in ice, but in frequency, then perhaps what those researchers encountered was not a technical failure, but the edge of the known. And what waits on the other side of that edge? Let us return briefly to mythology, not as fiction, but as encoded experience. In Zoroastrian cosmology, there is a legend of Arianem Veja, the first land created by Ahura Mazda, the god of light. Described as the most sacred of all lands, it was later struck by a great freeze as a punishment for forgetting divine law. The location of Arianem Veja is debated. Some place it in the Caucasus, others in the Arctic. But in the older texts, there is a repeated phrase, the land of brightness that turned to ice, a paradise that froze. In the Norse tradition, we find Niflheim, the world of ice and mist, lying far to the south, older even than Midgard. There, at the center, rests Vergelmir, a spring that feeds all the rivers of the world. And what lies above it? The roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, its knowledge frozen in silence, unreachable except through dream or death. These are not disconnected images. They are scattered pieces of a map, drawn in myth because no other language would hold the shape of what was remembered. A land of brightness turned to ice, a source beneath the world tree, a membrane that swallows waves. Could Antarctica be that threshold? In recent years, quantum physicists have turned their attention toward what they call information fields, non-local structures that seem to connect particles across space without any known mechanism. Entanglement, coherence, a ghost-like link between things once connected. If such fields exist on the smallest scale, is it unthinkable that they might also exist on the largest? That there might be places on Earth, nodes where the field intensifies, becomes tangible? Some call these places sacred sites, others call them geomagnetic anomalies. But across all cultures there is agreement. They are places where reality thins. Antarctica is the only place where such a field could remain undisturbed, uninhabited, untraveled, sealed not by walls, but by conditions hostile to the biological body, but not, perhaps, to the conscious field, not to thought, not to memory. In 2009, a classified expedition by the Japanese National Institute of Polar Research documented a cognitive disturbance among its lead scientists after spending 2 weeks in proximity to a subglacial valley near the South Pole. They experienced time distortion, spontaneous recall of childhood events in vivid detail, and recurring dreams of geometric shapes humming in blackness. These phenomena were omitted from the final report. But an internal memo, never meant for release, stated, "The ice listens, and the mind echoes back." The ice listens, and perhaps it remembers for us. Throughout history, the greatest mystics have spoken of memory not as storage, but as return, a process of recollection that collapses distance. Plato described learning as anamnesis, the act of remembering what the soul already knows. In Buddhist terms, awakening is not attainment, but remembrance, a clearing away, an unveiling. So what happens when a place remembers more than we do? What if Antarctica is not the blank page we think it is, but the final chapter of a forgotten book? We must consider this. All maps place Antarctica at the bottom. A symbolic burial. The last continent, the least explored, the final space. But when we invert the globe, when we make Antarctica the center, we see something unsettling. The continents curve outward, like petals from a hub. The ocean currents circle around it. The magnetic field responds to it. It is not the edge of the world. It is the keystone, and it has been hidden in plain sight. Why? Because to acknowledge its centrality would unravel the narrative of history, a narrative that begins with Mesopotamia and ends with us, progressing ever upward, unbroken. But if Antarctica contains the remnants of a world that came before, then our history is not a tower, it is a spiral, rising, collapsing, rising again. And perhaps the spiral tightens now. Global temperatures shift, the ice melts, more anomalies appear, radar shadows, electromagnetic bursts, organic traces in places where life should not exist. We drill deeper. We send new satellites. We see more, but we understand less. Because we are not looking at geology, we are looking at a mirror, and what reflects back is something older than civilization, older than myth, older than time. Something that once built not monuments, but frequencies, not cities, but harmonics, not machines, but meanings, encoded in stone, water, and sky. And what if it was not lost, but waiting for conditions to change, waiting for us to remember, waiting for the frequency to match? So we return again to the unspoken, suspended in the frozen breath of a world just beginning to stir. What if the ice was never meant to imprison, but to protect? In the archives of the Vatican, sealed behind miles of shelf and centuries of silence, is a map seldom spoken of. Created in the 15th century by an unknown cartographer, it was catalogued simply as Tabula Nivea, the snow table. The parchment bears no familiar coastlines, no compass rose, no names of known cities. Instead, it shows a single, symmetrical landmass, circular in shape, ringed by what appear to be high ridges or walls. At its center, an octagonal pattern, radiating lines like spokes of a wheel, and beneath the carefully etched Latin in the margins, one phrase, Memoria arde subglacial. Memory burns beneath the ice. The Church never made this document public. It was uncovered only briefly by a Jesuit scholar in the 1920s who noted its resemblance not to any known geography, but to Platonic cosmography, specifically the layout of Atlantis as described by Plato in Critias. A city of concentric rings, channels of water and stone, destroyed in a single day, buried not by sea, perhaps, but by snowfall eternal. What if the myth of Atlantis was never about water? What if its true fate was not submersion, but glaciation? Plato's description, so often romanticized, places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, in the direction of the setting sun. But directions, in ancient texts, were often symbolic. West did not mean west. It meant the place where light dies, the world's end, the final veil. Could this have meant south instead? Toward the pole where the sun vanishes for months, swallowed by the white void? The question hangs heavier when we examine the deeper layers of the Critias, where Plato describes the Atlanteans as possessing knowledge of vibration, of building with stone that sings, and of tuning the heart of the earth. Allegory or fragmented memory? Now consider this. In 2017, ground-penetrating radar near the Princess Elizabeth Station revealed a strange, octagonal shape beneath the ice, nearly 1 kilometer wide. The shape was not natural, its sides were equidistant, its edges aligned along geodesic lines, global energy paths traced by both ancient navigators and modern engineers. The anomaly was dismissed in an obscure Belgian report as a geometric lava extrusion. But lava does not form perfect octagons, and it certainly does not line up with magnetic grid points. There was no follow-up mission. There was no explanation. And perhaps that is the point. Because to explain it would mean rewriting the story, the one we've told ourselves for millennia, that we are alone, that we began from scratch, that we inherited nothing. But the ice tells another story. We found ancient pollen beneath it, fossilized ferns, evidence of trees that once swayed in a temperate breeze. But more haunting are the isotopic readings, carbon traces that suggest the presence, not just of forests, but of fire, controlled combustion. And then it stopped. As if someone turned the temperature down, as if a decision was made to pause a world, a reset. This isn't new. The idea of cataclysmic resets runs through every ancient tradition. The Hopi speak of 4 previous worlds, each destroyed when humanity forgot how to live in balance. The Maya counted time in baktuns, great cycles ending in fire, wind, or ice. In the Popol Vuh, the gods destroy and remake mankind multiple times, each time burying the memory deeper. And in Hindu cosmology, the universe undergoes Mahapralaya, a dissolution at the end of each age, followed by a new creation. A pulse, a breath, a forgetting. What if Antarctica is the frozen breath after the last exhale? What if it holds, intact, the memory of a world before? And what if we are not the first to reach its edge? There are stories, unverified, half-silenced, of 19th-century whaling ships steering too far south and vanishing. Of Soviet planes in the 1960s experiencing instrument failures over certain coordinates, of American satellites blinking offline when crossing specific latitudes. Anecdotes dismissed as coincidence, but patterns begin with the discarded. In 2021, a private expedition funded by an anonymous patron made landfall near the Shackleton Range. Their stated mission: biological sampling and climate research. But they brought with them seismic resonance equipment, tools used not to study surface ecology, but to listen. Deep listening. Earth listening. For weeks, nothing. Then, in the 3rd week, they recorded a sustained tone at 36 Hz, barely within human hearing. The sound persisted for 17 minutes, then stopped. That night, their communication link with the mainland was severed. When they returned, early, no recordings were released. One of the technicians resigned the same week. Her last social media post read only, "It's not asleep, it's listening back, it's listening back." And perhaps in our growing restlessness, our hunger for truth wrapped in data and precision, we have forgotten what truth sounds like. Not fact, not figure, but resonance. The deep vibration that calls something buried to stir. Because maybe memory is not static. Maybe it pulses. Maybe beneath that octagon, beneath the ridges and white, beneath the swirling magnetic currents and the cloaked anomalies, there is a thing that remembers, not in thought, but in sound, in tone, in alignment. And maybe that alignment is approaching again. We look now to the stars for answers, but the ground beneath our feet hums a deeper song. And the ice, ever still, ever white, may not be indifferent, but patient, waiting. Not because we are special, but because the cycle is nearly closed. So ask yourself, what if the myths of destruction are not warnings, but instructions left for us to find when the memory returns? In a remote monastery nestled in the mountains of Bhutan, there exists a manuscript known only to a few initiates. Its cover is stitched in dark cloth, its pages brittle with age, and its language, a lost dialect of classical Tibetan, remains untranslated by modern scholars. But one symbol recurs across its worn folios: a white circle, split by a vertical line, bisected with black dots. The monks call it Thiglanima, the eye of the hidden sun. They say it refers not to a star, but to a place where the sun hides in silence, where memory freezes but never dies. A place beyond mountains and beyond names. They say it lies far to the south. Legends such as these drift like snow, weightless yet enduring. They are never taken seriously in the halls of science, but they persist, clinging to the edges of cultures that refused to forget. They speak of a southern realm untouched by time, unreachable by force, seen only in dreams. And still satellites hover, drills descend, and the dream becomes data. In 2020, a team from the British Antarctic Survey conducted deep seismic imaging beneath the Dome Argus region, one of the highest and coldest points on the continent. What they found astonished them. A series of subsurface ridges arranged in concentric circles with a central depression nearly 1.5 kilometers wide. The ridges were regular, spaced with mathematical precision, and the rock beneath them showed signs of vitrification, partial glacification caused by intense, focused heat. The report, filed under internal review, never reached publication, but the images exist. They resemble the layout of Plato's Atlantis almost exactly. It is tempting to imagine this as confirmation, proof of myth made real. But what if that is the trap? What if Atlantis was never a place, but a placeholder? An echo of a memory older than any name we've given it? What if all these stories, Mu, Lemuria, Cascara, are not separate fictions, but regional distortions of a singular truth? A truth buried not just in the earth, but in our nervous systems, in the deepest layers of ancestral recall. The Aboriginal elders say the land dreams, that when you walk the ancient songlines, you are not just crossing terrain, you are activating it, that your feet vibrate memory into motion. The same idea echoes in the Celtic tradition, where ley lines were said to be dragon paths, currents of earth energy that respond to intention, to rhythm, to presence. What happens, then, when we walk upon a land that remembers more than we do? Antarctica, untouched for so long, is now crisscrossed by flight paths, sensor arrays, drilling rigs. We wake the ice not with reverence, but with instruments, and in return it stirs, not violently, not visibly, but subtly. A frequency shift, a hum, a thought forming beneath silence. In 2022, researchers monitoring seismic data near Mount Erebus noticed a curious pattern. Each time the sun dipped below the horizon during polar night, microquakes began, small, rhythmic, consistent. At first they were thought to be ice shifts, but when plotted over time, they matched an ancient musical scale, one still used in Sufi chanting rituals. The likelihood of this occurring by chance was calculated at less than 1 in 10 billion. The team said nothing. The data was archived. The world moved on. But patterns don't lie. They wait. Mount Erebus itself is strange, a volcano that never sleeps, its lava lake burning year-round despite the surrounding ice. The indigenous Maori once called it Te Punga o Te Waka a Maui, the anchor stone of Maui's canoe. According to legend, it was the stone that held the world still, the place where movement began, where sky touched earth. And in the shadows of that unblinking crater, something holds still indeed. Beneath Erebus, radar scans have revealed vertical shafts, perfectly cylindrical, plunging straight into the bedrock. They are too symmetrical to be lava tubes, too clean to be natural faults. Some extend more than 2 kilometers down. Their walls are lined with crystalline deposits that reflect electromagnetic waves in strange ways, bending signals, warping readings, even echoing sounds transmitted into them, as though they are not tunnels, but resonators. We are reminded, then, of the ancient ziggurats, built not merely to house priests or kings, but to channel sound, designed with perfect acoustic proportions to amplify chants, to align with celestial bodies, to harmonize space with intent. Could the same be true of these shafts? Are we looking not at the ruins of a forgotten civilization, but the organs of something still alive? If Antarctica is a body, an organism of memory, of resonance, of planetary intelligence, then perhaps these shafts are not architectural, but functional. Nervous channels, harmonic spines, input ports for sound, for thought, for alignment. The idea is absurd, and yet the data persists. And there is something else. Buried within a Cold War intelligence briefing from 1962, declassified in 2011, there lies a single, uncontextualized sentence slipped between dense pages of geopolitical analysis. There is increasing concern that repeated acoustic testing over the southern polar plateau may initiate a response mechanism we do not yet understand. No elaboration, no citation, just the warning. And then, nothing. But responses do not need fanfare. They can begin with a whisper, a shift in magnetic drift, a hum that wakes dreams, a tilt in consciousness, a memory once frozen, beginning to thaw. We do not know what we are waking. We do not know if it wishes to be found. But the deeper we listen, the more the silence starts to feel expectant, as if the ice, so long still, has been waiting, not for machines, not for conquest, but for a question asked in the right key. And maybe we are close to finding it. So now, in the breathless hush of this slow revelation, ask yourself, what if Antarctica is not a remnant of the past, but the doorway to something that never left? In 1996, a photograph surfaced in a small geological newsletter, barely noticed at the time. It showed a fragment of rock pulled from a borehole near the Ross ice shelf. Just 6 inches wide, dark, layered, but embedded in its sediment, 2 perfectly parallel filaments, metallic in color, spiraling through the strata like veins. The geologist, Dr. Salvatore Bianchi, noted in his brief report that the filaments were unlike any mineral formation known in the region. Their composition, an alloy of tungsten, niobium, and traces of rare earth metals, was anomalous for the surrounding bedrock, which dated to over 30 million years. The report disappeared within a year. Dr. Bianchi retired early. No further samples were permitted from that borehole. Why? We are told that the history of human technology begins in the last 10,000 years. That metallurgy, geometry, harmonic design, these are the products of civilization's dawn. But what if those tools are not new? What if they are remembered, recovered, or worse, rediscovered from someone else's loss? The filaments in that Antarctic core resemble modern superconducting wire designed to carry massive amounts of electrical current without resistance. Their alignment in the rock was not chaotic. They curved inwards toward a central axis, like the arms of a coil or an antenna, not a natural formation, a structure. And yet no follow-up was allowed. Because if what lies beneath Antarctica predates humanity and bears the marks of design, then everything we believe about progress becomes myth. And the myths we discarded become warnings. There are more clues, but they are buried where few look. In the mid-1970s, Soviet researchers at Novolazarevskaya Station conducted experiments using ultra-low-frequency transmission across the ice. Their goal, to test whether the polar plateau could serve as a medium for long-range communication. But during one experiment, something strange occurred. The signal they sent, simple binary pulses, returned to them 5 hours later, altered, not delayed, altered. The return signal contained a series of variations, minute changes in phase and amplitude that, when graphed, formed a repeating pattern. When overlaid with an ancient symbol from the Indus Valley, a spiral enclosed in a square, the match was near perfect. Coincidence, perhaps, or response. The Soviet logs mentioned the incident only once, in an appendix labeled Inconclusive Atmospheric Echo, but one of the engineers involved later emigrated to Canada. In an unpublished letter he wrote, "We tried to speak to the ice, and it answered, not with words but with shape, with memory. Memory. Always memory. And not just in stone or ice, but in sound, in field, in form." Around the same time, another discovery was made halfway across the world, in the caves of southern Chile. Deep within the labyrinths of Tierra del Fuego, explorers found petroglyphs, images carved by unknown hands, in a style not matching the local Selknam or Yagan traditions. The images depicted circular patterns, radiating lines, and at their center, what looked like a map, not of the region, not of South America, but of Antarctica, ice-free. The coastlines matched the 1513 Piri Reis map, and in one carving, barely distinguishable under centuries of mineral staining, there appeared to be a shape resembling a tetrahedron, a three-dimensional pyramid, suspended over the Antarctic peninsula. Is this coincidence too? How would ancient peoples from the far end of the Americas know the shape of a continent buried in ice for thousands of years, unless the knowledge was inherited, or gifted, or found? In the 1980s, a classified U.S. satellite known only as Area 12 captured thermal readings from beneath East Antarctica that were eventually leaked to an independent researcher. The satellite had detected a sustained heat signature deep within the ice sheet, consistent with a geothermal source, but more precise, more stable, more engineered. The shape of the heat plume was hexagonal, regular, balanced, centered. It pulsed every 19 minutes. The number 19 recurs in ancient mathematics, in the Mayan long count, in the metonic cycle of the moon, in Sumerian records. It is a harmonic interval, a loop through time. What in nature pulses with such perfect regularity, and why does it match sacred geometry? No explanation was offered. The Area 12 data was reclassified. The researcher silenced. The public turned away, distracted by newer stories. But the pulse did not stop. And neither did the ice. Each year now, we drill deeper. Ice melts. Old air rises from below, carrying spores, ash, whispers, and with each layer removed, the temperature of our questions rises. What was once a blank space is now a mirror, reflecting not the world above, but the world before. And it is not empty. Ancient texts have always warned of guardians. The Sumerians spoke of Apkallu, beings who lived before the flood, who emerged to teach and vanished beneath the earth. The Hebrews called them watchers. The Vedas called them rishis of the stars. The Egyptians depicted them as builders with elongated skulls and luminous crowns, retreating southward after the first time, Zep Tepi. All speak of teachers who left, but none say they died. Perhaps because they didn't. Perhaps they withdrew. And if the southern ice is not a tomb, but a chamber, then what lies beneath is not dead, but waiting, not primitive, but preserved. And then we must wonder, if memory is stored not just in brain and blood, but in geometry and frequency, then could the shapes beneath Antarctica be cognitive? Not architecture, but awareness, not structures, but thoughts, vast and slow, embedded in Earth's crust, pulsing through ice and silence? The deeper we go, the closer we come to a place that may not welcome visitors, not out of hostility, but out of design. Because what sleeps beneath may not want to be disturbed, or worse, may only stir when we begin to remember who we were. So now we listen. Through sonar, through resonance, through dreams we can't explain. And every whisper from the ice echoes with a single question, carved into stone, encoded into myth, pulsing through circuits and time. What if we are not discovering Antarctica, but awakening what it was built to contain? In 1936, just before the world descended into war, an obscure Argentine physicist named Ernesto Cartellani published a paper in a short-lived journal of terrestrial magnetism. The title was cryptic, Sobre la deriva de la memoria polar, on the drift of polar memory. His thesis, ridiculed by the few who read it, proposed that the Earth's poles are not merely geophysical coordinates, but neurological centers, sites of planetary recall. He argued that shifts in consciousness across human epochs coincided with subtle displacements of magnetic force toward or away from these poles, and that what we experience as historical amnesia may be the result not of lost records, but of dislocated resonance. At the time, no one listened. But buried in the paper's final paragraph was a single line, handwritten in the margin of the author's own copy, discovered decades later in a Buenos Aires archive. When the southern pole returns to alignment, so too will the dream resume. The dream. It always returns. And perhaps it never left. In the cold of the Antarctic plateau, dreams behave strangely. Reports from expedition teams have documented lucid episodes, shared symbols, and reoccurring images among members who slept in close proximity to certain sites, particularly near Dome Charlie. The patterns are vague: concentric shapes, mirrored cities, lights beneath dark water, but the recurrence is statistically improbable, especially among scientists trained to dismiss meaning from the subconscious. What causes this convergence of inner vision? Some point to the extreme circadian disruption of polar nights. Others to the monotony of ice, inducing mild psychosis. But that doesn't explain why multiple subjects, separated by time and culture, dream the same geometry, nor why some awaken speaking languages they never learned. In 2005, a Brazilian glaciologist reported speaking fluent Sumerian upon waking from a dream during a solo overnight mission near the Amundsen Scott station. Her recordings, made immediately after waking, were analyzed by two independent philologists. The grammar was inconsistent, but recognizable. The vocabulary, theological. She spoke of the eye buried in the white gate and the song that waits at the base of the world. She remembered nothing the next day. Her research was discontinued, and the ice, again, was blamed. But language does not emerge from hallucination, not whole, not ancient. So we ask again, is Antarctica whispering to us, or are we remembering what we promised to forget? The idea that memory could be externalized, stored not in the brain but in fields, in shapes, in echo, is not new. Ancient Egyptian rituals spoke of the Per Ankh, the house of life, where knowledge was kept alive not just in scrolls, but in soundings, intoned sequences that refreshed cosmic memory. The Vedic tradition spoke of Akashic fields, vibratory records of all events, intentions, and thoughts, preserved not in matter, but in the ether. Modern quantum theory flirts with the same. The zero-point field, a quantum vacuum bubbling with latent information, a place where time folds, where data lingers, and where, perhaps, Antarctica's frozen crust acts as a perfect storage medium. We have always built our most sacred temples in alignment with resonance. The Hypogeum in Malta, for instance, an underground complex over 5,000 years old, was designed so that a male voice chanting at 111 hertz in a specific chamber would resonate throughout the entire structure, altering brain waves of all present. Acoustic archaeology now reveals that similar frequencies were embedded in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, in the Oracle Room at Delphi, and in pre-Columbian sites across Mesoamerica, all tuned to a specific range of vibration, all designed to trigger remembrance. And now we learn that beneath the ice of Antarctica, similar frequencies emerge, not from human design, but from the Earth itself. Low tones, pulses, echoes. In 2019, during a high-resolution seismic study near the Dome Fuji drilling site, instruments recorded a rhythmic vibration emanating from beneath the subglacial basin. Not tectonic, not glacial. It cycled every 49 minutes, oscillating at 101 hertz, the same frequency as the hypogeum, the same tone used in ancient initiation rites. The team said nothing. Their data was quietly reassigned to noise analysis, but noise has meaning if you learn how to listen. There is an old Buddhist concept, satori, the sudden intuitive glimpse into the nature of reality, not through study, not through logic, but through resonance, the strike of a bell, the hush of snowfall, the pressure of silence. Perhaps Antarctica is satori on a planetary scale, a bell that has not yet rung but waits, a pressure building not in weather but in memory. What happens when that bell sounds? Will it be audible, physical, catastrophic? Or will it be inward, a mass awakening, a tidal wave not of water but of realization? That what we have called myth is map, that what we have dismissed as dream is archive, that what we have buried beneath ice was never meant to be lost, only shielded until the time was right. And now our instruments grow sensitive, our minds restless, our sleep fractured. We gather around the ice like moths circling a dim light, unsure whether it warms or burns, and beneath us, something old begins to hum, not because we command it, but because we've stepped into range, into alignment, into resonance. And so the dream resumes, slow, strange, familiar. Its voice grows louder now, not in words, but in tone. So we must ask, trembling at the edge of comprehension, what if we were never meant to conquer Antarctica, but to remember what we once were through its song? In 2010, a private company conducting mineral prospecting in West Antarctica filed a report with the U.S. Geological Survey. Buried in the appendix, beneath thermal imaging and mineral density readings, was an anomalous data set. An electromagnetic spike recorded 1.7 kilometers below the surface, stretching over a 3-mile area. The frequency it emitted was narrowband, clean, precise, unlike anything naturally occurring. The surveyors, unfamiliar with the signal, flagged it as interference and moved on. But those who understood paid attention. Because the frequency, 446 kHz, was nearly identical to one used in ancient Chinese ritual bronze chimes known as bianzhong. Instruments cast over 2,000 years ago, tuned not by trial, but by cosmology. Tuned, specifically, to the harmonic intervals said to govern the music of the spheres. And now, beneath a frozen continent that no civilization was ever supposed to touch, that same frequency pulses in silence. We keep circling this truth, as if afraid to look directly at it. That Antarctica is not blank, not random, not natural. It is tuned. And perhaps the beings that came before, if they were beings at all, did not build temples or monuments in the way we imagine, but instruments, devices designed to resonate with Earth itself, to modulate memory, to preserve pattern through catastrophe. Because what survives ice? Not flesh, not empire, only frequency, only form. In 2014, a short-lived research project attempted to map the deep ice geometry near Lake Concordia using muon tomography, a particle-based imaging technique typically used in volcanoes and pyramids. The results were never officially published, but a series of slides leaked to a Norwegian geophysics forum revealed stunning shapes: cylindrical voids in perfect vertical alignment, spiral corridors radiating outward from a central node. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos, but to those who studied ancient geometry, it was unmistakable. The golden ratio, phi embedded in ice like a fossil of thought. Nature uses phi in growth, nautilus shells, sunflower seeds, hurricanes. But this was not growth, it was design, etched into the bedrock before the glaciers came. And perhaps, as the ice thickened, it became a preservative, a lock or a lens, because when light moves through ice, it bends, it slows, it fractures into colors we cannot see. And when sound passes through layered ice sheets, it warps into harmonic echoes. Radar engineers have noted that Antarctic returns sometimes sing back, producing faint harmonics unrelated to the initiating pulse. These echoes have been dismissed as signal artifacts. But what if they are messages, not sent by something buried, but reflected by something remembered? If Antarctica is an archive, not of objects, but of intent, then it may be reflecting more than we realize. In the Hindu Rig Veda, there is mention of a sacred place at the root of the world, where knowledge is stored not in books, but in tone. The text calls it Swar Loka, the realm of sound above silence, accessed not by foot, but by vibration. It is described as unreachable by fire or sword, but able to stir the knower who sleeps. It is not a place of the dead, but of paused awakening. And in the lost city of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists once unearthed a small copper plate etched with concentric circles and sine wave markings. The artifact was never identified, but its shape matched the subglacial anomalies recently mapped beneath the Antarctic plateau, spiral domes encircled by geometric terraces. Not random, resonant. And then we must ask, could it be that before maps, before writing, before even spoken myth, there was geometry? A language not learned but remembered, a syntax of space. And if so, might the ice be a page? A medium through which that syntax waits to be read again? There is a reason Antarctica remains off-limits. Not by law alone, but by consensus. Scientists may visit, but they must not wander. Nations may observe, but they must not claim. Even now, in an age of colonization by commerce, the continent remains strangely untouched, suspiciously undisturbed. The reasons cited are always environmental, but the real reason may be deeper. Perhaps something was discovered long ago, And perhaps the price of knowing is forgetting. There are whispers, uncorroborated, unverifiable, of a 1958 NATO report that suggested the magnetic flux beneath Antarctica was artificial in pattern, that the field anomalies were consistent with field-manipulating technology. That further exploration was inadvisable until harmonics are better understood. That report has never surfaced, but those who believe continue searching. In 2018, a team of acoustic physicists at the University of Kyoto, using satellite resonance data, observed that Earth's overall frequency had shifted slightly, just 0.2 hertz, barely measurable. But when they cross-referenced the change with solar cycles, lunar drift, and tectonic records, nothing accounted for it. Nothing. Except a period of rapid melt in East Antarctica. As the ice retreated, Earth's frequency shifted, as if something had moved, as if a weight, long anchored in silence, had been lifted, just slightly. We think of the Earth as passive. But what if it is reactive? What if our actions, our drilling, our observation have activated a forgotten circuit? And what if that circuit is not mechanical, but conscious? Because the deeper we go, the more the boundaries blur. Between memory and matter, between place and presence. The Antarctic ice sheet is not just frozen water. It is crystalline. It holds charge. It conducts signal. It amplifies. And we are the frequency that now vibrates against it. The resonance grows louder. Dreams thicken. Ancient symbols return to our collective imagination. The spiral, the hexagon, the eye. And beneath it all, something old listens, not with ears, but with field. And so we must ask, before the spiral tightens further, what if we are not just exploring Antarctica's surface, but being drawn back into a system that once knew us by sound, not by name? In 1973, aboard the USNS Eltanin, a research vessel conducting oceanographic surveys in the Southern Ocean, a photograph was taken that still defies explanation. At a depth of nearly 13,000 feet, just off the coast of Wilks Land, an underwater camera captured a strange structure protruding from the seabed. It was vertical, symmetrical, cross-shaped, mechanical in appearance. The image made its way into classified Navy files, but not before a blurry reproduction reached a handful of civilian researchers. It came to be known as the Eltanin antenna, though no explanation followed. Geologists said it must be a sponge. Engineers said no sponge grows in geometric arms of equal length, with joints and tapering ends. The official line remains, unknown biological specimen. But others saw something different. They saw a relic, not of organic life, but of signal, because the placement wasn't random. The structure lay directly along an ancient submerged fault line, one that, if extended northward, intersects with the magnetic anomalies under East Antarctica. The suggestion was disturbing, unprovable, and quickly buried, that this object was once part of a global resonance network, and that its twin, its mirror, its origin, lies frozen beneath the Antarctic ice. We often imagine lost technology as metal and wire. But what if the intelligence that came before didn't build machines as we do? What if it sculpted frequency, encoded thought into form, and wove awareness into terrain? What if consciousness, not industry, was the medium of their craft? Antarctica, silent and sealed, may not be home to machines. It may be home to programs, running still, slow, recursive, built not of code but of crystal and echo and geometry, not dead, just dormant. We see the hints. In 2011, German researchers studying ice core isotopes found something strange buried in the Vostok Basin. Trapped gases, primarily xenon, showed unnatural ratios, not impossible, but highly anomalous. Xenon-129, a rare isotope typically produced in nuclear reactions, was overrepresented by 38%. The team had no explanation, no nearby geological source, no known decay sequence. Their paper ended quietly, their funding quietly redirected. But Xenon-129 does not just occur. It lingers, and it remembers where it came from. One physicist, writing under a pseudonym, published a short, unofficial analysis. His conclusion was brief, speculative, and chilling. This is the fingerprint of something once active, something that changed the chemistry of deep time, something that changed time. That phrase echoes. Because throughout human memory, Antarctica is never just a landmass, it is a threshold. The Greeks called it Antarcticos, the opposite of the bear, the shadow of the known sky. In Egyptian cosmology, the south was Kentamentu, the land of those who await, a place of passage, of return. And in Taoist lore, the pole was believed to house the reverse current, the gate through which spirit exits the body and memory enters the earth. We thought these were metaphors. But what if they're coordinates? In 2003, a Canadian research balloon launched over the Antarctic ice detected an unexplained burst of high-energy neutrinos, particles that can pass through matter unhindered. The signal came not from space, but from beneath the ice. It happened twice more in the following months. No source was found. The event was dubbed impossible. The instruments rechecked. But some whispers in the astrophysics community offered a quieter theory. Something beneath the ice wasn't emitting neutrinos. Something was reflecting them. And only certain geometries, those shaped by intelligence, can reflect neutrino paths in structured form. We know now that memory does not only belong to minds, it belongs to fields, to stones, to the architecture of silence. There is an entire discipline, acoustic archaeology, that studies how ancient spaces were built to shape sound. The Temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza returns a chirp when clapped at its base, mimicking the sacred Quetzal bird. The hypogeum of Malta, tuned to 111 Hz, induces altered states of awareness in those who chant inside it. These are not coincidences. They are architectures of attention. What if Antarctica holds the greatest of these? Not a structure, but an arrangement. Not a temple, but a circuit. Spread across miles of ice and stone, buried in fields of echo, tuned to the harmonics of Earth's precession. And what if that circuit is beginning to hum again? We have long assumed that the past is still, that it does not move. But perhaps it only sleeps until the signal returns. Until a certain threshold of planetary vibration, temperature, magnetism, thought is met. We're closer now than ever. Glaciers retreat, crust shifts, solar flares spike, consciousness expands, patterns resurface in dreams, in symbols, in sudden discoveries. It feels accidental, but so does the moment when a radio turns to the exact frequency of a hidden broadcast. And then, the static ends. What if that's what's happening now? What if the ice is not melting from climate alone, but from contact, from resonance, a meeting of tones, a return of alignment? We are no longer passive observers. We are participants, feet upon the ice, minds vibrating with forgotten chords, bodies reawakening to frequencies once sung into stone. Perhaps we're not exploring. Perhaps we're responding. A call answered. A design remembered. A memory resumed. And so we come again to the silent question vibrating beneath it all, beneath the poles and the myths and the hum of shifting stars. What if Antarctica was never meant to be found, but to find us when the signal was right? In 1999, a quiet study published by a Japanese glaciologist went unnoticed by most of the scientific community. Conducted at Dome F, one of the most isolated places on Earth, the project aimed to measure low-frequency resonance patterns in deep Antarctic ice. The study concluded with a cryptic phrase: below 2.8 kilometers, the vibrational behavior becomes non-linear. No further explanation, no follow-up papers. The funding was pulled. But in a footnote, small, almost hidden, the author made reference to something rarely mentioned in modern science: sympathetic resonance. It's a principle found in ancient instruments. When one string is plucked, another, tuned to the same frequency, vibrates in response, across distance, without touch. So what, then, is vibrating under the ice? And more troublingly, what is it vibrating with? The frequencies recorded at Dome F matched patterns long known to archaeomusicologists, specifically the acoustic profiles of lithophones, stone instruments used by Neolithic cultures across Asia, Africa, and Oceania. These stones, when struck, ring with tones that sit in precise mathematical relationships, not chaotic, not decorative, intentional. How could the resonant behavior of Antarctic ice mimic instruments carved by prehistoric hands? Unless the ice itself is part of an instrument, not played, but waiting for the other string to sound. We often think of Antarctica as isolated, but the web of evidence says otherwise. Consider this. In 2006, researchers in Chad uncovered a megalithic circle, Stonehenge-like, positioned with astronomical precision. When the orientation lines were extended south, they intersected with the location of Dome Argus, Antarctica's highest ice dome. The line was not random. It passed through two other ancient observatories on its path: the Nabta Playa Calendar Circle in Egypt and the megalithic site at Tiahuanaco, Bolivia. 3 cultures, 3 continents, 1 alignment, through the ice. These were not primitive people stumbling upon math. They were navigating an architecture of memory that stretched beyond geography, a harmonic network, buried, broken, but not erased. Because memory, real memory, is not linear, it is recursive, spiral. And if Antarctica holds the deepest spiral, then each point of resonance across Earth may still be echoing with a signal that originates there. In 2020, seismic researchers noticed an unusual phase shift in waves propagating through the Antarctic lithosphere. These were not caused by tectonics, not earthquakes. They were slow waves, deep, low, symmetrical, traveling in repeating intervals. One physicist described them as rhythmic pulses, almost like a planetary breath. And like breath, they carry something. The ancients called it prana, the Egyptians ka, the Chinese ki, energy not of matter but of motion, flow, pattern. Perhaps that's what's stirring now, not an object, not a machine, but a pattern long paused, a forgotten exhalation from the earth itself. If we listen deeper, beyond sound, we find this rhythm reflected elsewhere, in coral growth spirals, in ocean currents circling the southern pole, in the heartbeat variability of mammals living closest to the magnetic equator. All moving to a slow, ancient tempo. And recently, something has changed. That tempo is accelerating. In late 2022, Two separate studies reported a global uptick in what's called Schumann resonance, the Earth's background electromagnetic pulse, generated between the surface and the ionosphere. Typically stable, it began spiking irregularly, with one burst aligning precisely with a solar storm, and another, curiously, with a massive calving event in West Antarctica. No cause was assigned, no media coverage followed. But those who track such things noticed the timing, not just of ice breaking, but of dreams changing. Because as the frequency shifts, so do we. Across forums and journals, more people report similar experiences, vivid dreams of structures under snow, of mirrored cities, of a sky that doesn't match the stars above us now. Psychologists call it a coping mechanism. But how does a dream encode the same architectural layout recorded in a LiDAR scan weeks later? We are not just observers. We are receptors. And Antarctica may be the signal we forgot how to hear. But now, perhaps, we're remembering. The Dogon of Mali say that true knowledge is passed not through language, but through vibration. That certain tones awaken cellular memory. That myths are not stories, but frequencies frozen in metaphor, waiting to be activated by sound. The Book of Enoch says the fallen watchers were bound beneath the earth, in a place of snow and silence, until a time appointed for their return. Not in punishment, but in timing, a rhythm of re-entry, a rejoining of cycles. Maybe this is that time. Because cycles don't announce themselves with spectacle. They arrive softly, in shifts, in tones, in dreams, and Antarctica is not screaming, it is resonating, as if something beneath the ice is tuning the earth again, drawing scattered minds into harmonic proximity, aligning memory not through fact, but through feeling, through the chill that runs down your spine when a forgotten truth brushes the edge of perception. And so we arrive here, in this spiral of sound and stillness, with no conclusion, only a deeper echo. What if Antarctica is not the last frontier of Earth, but the first forgotten chord of a planetary song we've only just begun to hear again? In 1954, during the third year of Operation Deep Freeze, a small group of U.S. Navy engineers was dispatched to survey a stretch of the Trans-Antarctic Mountains. Their task? To locate a stable region for an emergency airstrip. What they found never entered the mission logs. In a narrow canyon carved by an ancient glacier, partially exposed by wind erosion, stood a wall, not of ice or stone, but of fused basalt, black and smooth, rising 10 meters high and perfectly vertical. There were no tool marks, no layering, no indication it was part of the natural terrain. When one of the men touched it, he claimed to feel a hum, low and deep, like a pressure in the skull more than in the ears. They called it the mirror. Within 3 weeks, the site was sealed. The canyon was declared unstable, and the men were reassigned, sworn to silence under military code. But decades later, in an interview never aired, one of them whispered, "It wasn't a wall, it was a surface. Something behind it was still aware." We have always imagined ancient technology as something external, gears, circuitry, artifacts. But what if the most advanced intelligence leaves no debris? What if it leaves behind resonance, alignment, memory embedded in structure? Not just physical, but dimensional. And what if Antarctica is not the vault that holds it, but the veil that filters it? That canyon, real or apocryphal, is one of many whispered anomalies across the continent. Places where compasses spin, radio signals blur, and people speak of time moving strangely. Even seasoned pilots report whiteouts, not caused by weather, but by spatial distortion. Days lost, flight paths looping impossibly back to origin points. The native peoples of Tierra del Fuego told stories of ice that remembers, places beyond the southern winds where the world folds in on itself, where mountains blink and vanish, and voices echo before they're spoken. To them, this wasn't magic. It was a known border, a place not to cross. But we've crossed it anyway, and the deeper we go, the more the strangeness tightens. Not in the form of spectacle, but in subtle pattern. In 2017, scientists at the British Antarctic Survey recorded a seismic event beneath Marie Byrd land that defied classification. A tremor, 23 seconds long, centered over no known fault, registering on instruments thousands of miles away. When the waveform was converted into audio, it didn't sound like tectonic movement. It sounded like a chime. Not a crack or groan, but a tonal ringing. One researcher noted its frequency, 528 Hz. It's known to musicologists as the miracle tone, the same frequency used in Gregorian chants, the same found in DNA healing tones of solfeggio scales, the same associated, by some traditions, with transformation. What kind of earth sings at that frequency, and who or what is it trying to reach? In the 1970s, satellite imagery began revealing strange rectilinear features buried under hundreds of meters of ice, structures that, when mapped, formed triangles across the polar plateau. The distances between them, exact. The angles, precise. Geologists called them subglacial rift expressions. But to those who studied archaeogeometry, the pattern was unmistakable. It matched the layout of Orion's belt, as reflected in the Giza pyramids, as echoed in Teotihuacan, as mirrored in Angkor Wat. 3 stars, 3 points, a map. But a map to what? When ancient civilizations aligned their monuments with Orion, they weren't just observing stars, they were following instruction. The pyramid texts speak of the pharaoh's soul traveling through Orion to the place of beginning. In the Rig Veda, Orion is known as Mriga, the deer, whose leap across the heavens is mirrored in the earth below. What if those alignments weren't symbolic? What if they were coordinates? A triangulation pointing south, beneath the ice. Because what we find in Antarctica is not random, it is familiar. Familiar not from this life, but from a long-forgotten architecture of presence, geometry encoded in dream, frequency sealed in stone. A resonance we've buried not just under glaciers, but under the sediment of disbelief. Yet still, it pulses, still it hums. And now, we build instruments more sensitive than ever before. Quantum sensors, LiDAR grids, AI-driven pattern recognizers. And they all point to the same truth. Something beneath the ice is structured, something massive, something old, but more importantly, something still active. What if we were wrong to treat Antarctica as a frontier? What if it is not where the world ends, but where it began? What if the ice sheet is not a frozen accident, but an intentional layer, placed not by nature, but by design? To conceal, to preserve, to protect. Not us from it, but it from us, because resonance is not neutral. It responds to intention, and intention in our time has grown sharp, cut by conquest, dulled by greed. We do not approach the ice with reverence. We come with drills, drones, data harvesters. We ask no permission. We listen only to noise. But beneath us the signal remains, waiting, in the stone, in the silence, in the walls that are not walls but thresholds. And the more we press, the more it stirs, as if the ancient machine beneath our feet is not just remembering, but but measuring the frequency of our thought, measuring the quality of our return. So we must ask now, at the edge of the spiral, trembling in the long breath of the ice, what if we are not the first to reach this point, but merely the next, in a long line of civilizations tested by the gate beneath Antarctica? In the earliest fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a passage almost always overlooked, too strange, too fragmented to be taken seriously. It speaks of a place where the sky is hidden beneath the earth, where the breath of the watchers becomes ice, and where no sun rises, yet the light is old. Scholars dismiss it as apocalyptic allegory. But what if it was not? What if it was a memory, dim, distorted but real, of a location that was already myth by the time it was recorded? A land of ice where the sky is hidden, a vault of light older than the sun, a whisper beneath the frozen breath of the world. Antarctica. Again, it draws us back. In 2015, a thermal anomaly was detected near the South Pole, an area beneath the ice where the temperature rose rapidly without seismic cause. Satellite readings showed a symmetrical shape at its center, hexagonal, faint but measurable. The anomaly lasted for only 14 minutes. Then the temperature returned to normal. The data was archived. No public announcement followed. But those who saw it described the heat signature with one word: emission. Not passive, not internal, but something sent. What kind of structure emits heat in a perfect hexagon, then falls silent again? The geometry matters. The hexagon appears again and again in places of ancient power, in Saturn's North Pole storm, in Tibetan mandalas, in Islamic mosaics. The shape is not decorative, it is harmonic. Six-fold symmetry, a stabilizing waveform in physical space, and in sacred architecture, it appears wherever balance is sought between heaven and earth. What if what lies beneath Antarctica is not just balanced, but tuned? Not architecture, but calibration. We know now that ancient sites, Giza, Göbekli Tepe, Chavandahuntar, were tuned acoustically. Their stones vibrate at specific frequencies, affecting human brain waves, shifting consciousness. These weren't burial sites, they were instruments, resonance chambers. So what, then, is Antarctica? A continent-sized chamber? A global resonator? A planetary tuner, placed not by accident, but as part of a system far older than the civilizations we call ancient? The implications fracture everything. And yet, the data accumulates. In 2021, a gravitational wave detector in the Indian Ocean picked up a faint but consistent oscillation, barely measurable, lasting over 5 hours. Its direction, south. When triangulated, its origin point centered near the Dome Sea region of East Antarctica. The signal's frequency matched nothing in recorded seismic or celestial events, but it harmonized perfectly with a tone known from ancient Egyptian temple rituals, 432 Hz. This is the tone used to tune instruments before Western standardization, the tone of the human voice at rest, the tone, some claim, of the Earth itself. Who or what sends that tone now? Some believe it is coincidence. Others are beginning to listen more closely, because the anomalies are converging. Unrelated teams from unrelated nations, measuring unrelated fields, are finding the same things: symmetrical voids, rhythmic pulses, geometric alignments that extend beneath ice and ocean, connecting ruins across continents, from Angkor to Giza, from the Andes to the South Pole. A web, a circuit. And what is a circuit? Not just a line, but a loop. A system that recycles energy, processes memory, preserves pattern. And when enough charge returns to the system, something completes. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant by the turning. The Hopi call it the fourth world ending. The Norse spoke of Ragnarok, not just destruction, but the resetting of the world tree. The Mayan calendar ended not in apocalypse, but in resynchronization, a recalibration of the field. Perhaps Antarctica is the conductor of that calibration. And perhaps we are drawing near the moment when the circuit closes again. It is not just the instruments that detect it. People feel it too. Dreams intensify. Time bends. Memories of things that never happened feel closer than those that did. People across the world report the same symbols appearing in meditation, in trance, in moments between sleep and waking. Spirals, eyes, hexagons, submerged temples beneath lightless ice. We explain it away as archetype, coincidence, shared mythos. But what if it is none of those? What if it is signal leakage, the hum beneath the hum? A memory not stored in our brains, but in the ground. And when we come into proximity with certain places, certain tones, we sync, we resonate. The ancient Taoists believed the Earth had acupuncture points, sites where the QE of the planet could be accessed, modulated, restored. They mapped them with intuition and sky watching. Many of those points align, curiously, with the magnetic nodes now recognized by modern geophysics. And what lies at the final southern node? Antarctica, unmapped, unspoken, protected not by walls but by conditions, by narrative, by treaty, by silence, but not for long, because the silence grows louder. In recent years, satellite time-lapse images have revealed something stunning. As ice melts and refreezes, the land beneath rises, not just through isostatic rebound, but in measurable pulses, as though breathing, as though remembering. Patterns appear, then vanish, radar ghosts, shapes that hold for minutes, hexagons, spires, grid-like traces, then dissolve again under snow. Signals without language, responses without origin, yet always precise. Perhaps Antarctica is not waiting for us. Perhaps it never was. Perhaps we are only the latest passers-by, tuned by proximity, pulled by resonance, drawn like iron filings into the shape of a field we cannot see. And the field remembers, not our names, but our patterns. So as we edge nearer, through study, through dream, through sound, we must ask, what happens when we re-enter the resonance of something that has always known how to recognize us? In 2002, a little-known paper appeared in the Proceedings of the Russian Academy of Sciences. It reported on unusual geological formations beneath the Gamburtsev subglacial mountains, a mountain range entirely hidden beneath 2 miles of Antarctic ice. Using radar tomography, the team discovered not only sharp ridgelines and steep valleys, but something else: hollows. Perfectly spherical voids, aligned in a repeating sequence across the range, each measuring nearly 90 meters in diameter. The pattern was not natural. Nature does not build with equal spacing and spherical subtraction. The team suggested karstic erosion, a plausible, if hollow, explanation. But in the margins of the lead researcher's personal notes, scribbled in pencil, was a single phrase, more like vaults. Vaults, hollow spaces, not buried by ice, but made to exist beneath it. Who builds vaults under an uninhabited continent? And more disturbingly, for what purpose? Some have speculated that the Gamburtsev Mountains were never natural to begin with, that they were seeded, not formed, by a force unknown before the last glaciation, their topography defies expectation. Massive elevation gain beneath ice without corresponding uplift on adjacent crust. They are not just high, they are wrong. Wrong unless you are building something that was meant to last a dozen extinction events, and to remain hidden until the right harmonic sequence returned. A dormant architecture, a timed release. The idea of time-release memory is not new. The Mahabharata speaks of astra, divine weapons buried in the earth, locked by mantras, awaiting reactivation by those with correct vibrational keys. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are bound in the nether frost until the day appointed. Tibetan scrolls describe terma, hidden teachings embedded in the landscape, programmed to emerge when the world is ready. What if Antarctica is the final terma? Not a teaching, not a weapon, a reawakening protocol. And what if our proximity, our drilling, mapping, theorizing is not discovery, but trigger? There is reason to consider it. In 2022, a research drone operating near the South Pole had detected a sudden local spike in radiation, not gamma, not solar, but neutrino flux. A surge impossible to explain by background cosmic sources. It lasted 43 seconds. No damage occurred. But the instruments logged a secondary anomaly, a frequency-modulated EM wave, faint, layered over the radiation burst, like a whisper riding a storm. The pattern of the wave, when decoded spectrally, produced a shape, a spiral. Not mathematical noise, not natural interference, but a signature. We are conditioned to seek intelligence in language. But the deepest forms of knowledge come not in words, but in structure, in alignment, in vibration. Our DNA coils in spirals, galaxies spin as spirals, ancient petroglyphs carved spirals onto stone walls long before the wheel was imagined. Why? Because the spiral is not just a symbol, it is a bridge, a geometry of approach, a method of remembering. And now Antarctica whispers spirals back to us, through data, through melt, through dream. Even the animals respond. In recent years, migratory patterns in birds, whales, and deep-sea creatures have shifted subtly southward. Not erratic, not confused. Purposeful. As though something beneath the ice is calling them. A tone? A current? A memory? In 2021, a team tagging elephant seals found that one female repeatedly broke from migration routes to circle a specific area off the Antarctic coast, over what maps label Subglacial Lake on October 29. The seal returned there 4 times, each visit coinciding with minor magnetic fluctuations measured by satellite. Why would a marine mammal, guided by instinct honed over millennia, be drawn to a hidden lake beneath miles of ice? Unless something beneath it reached out. Unless the seal heard what we cannot. In shamanic traditions across the world, animals are not simply fauna. They are messengers, those attuned to frequencies we forgot. Birds sense magnetic north. Whales navigate by Earth's deep sonic pulse. Bees dance in patterns of resonance. In Siberia, it is said that the great elk leads the shaman to the frozen gate. In Polynesia, the turtle carries the dreamer across the ocean of origin. And now, something is calling them south. We should be listening. But perhaps we already are, and we just don't realize it. Because the dreams have returned. Across the globe, reports have surfaced of recurring visions. Cities beneath glass, spirals of black ice, voices speaking in tones rather than words. People who've never met draw the same symbols, describe the same landscapes, speak of towers that rise and fall with light alone. Psychologists dismiss it as collective fantasy. But what if it's not fantasy? What if it's leakage? the edges of a resonance field bleeding through the veil. In ancient Greece, the oracle of Delphi spoke after inhaling vapors rising from the earth. Her utterances were garbled, but priests transcribed them into prophecy. Scientists now say she was likely hallucinating from ethylene gas. But maybe the Earth was not poisoning her. Maybe it was speaking. Maybe Antarctica has begun to do the same. Not in audible language, but in field, in dream, in resonance. And we, long deafened by noise, are finally quiet enough to hear it. There is a theory, unpublished, shared only in whispers, that Earth hosts not life, but conscious process, that it is not merely a habitat, but an interface, a container of memory far older than our species, designed not to teach, but to mirror, to reflect intention, and in doing so, judge it, and that Antarctica is the mirror's center. So now we drill, we listen, we circle, we return, not as explorers, but as echoes, drawn into the spiral once again, and in that spiral, carved into ice and silence, another question waits, unspoken, unbearable, undeniable. What if Antarctica is not revealing itself to us, but revealing us to ourselves? There is a kind of stillness that does not belong to absence, but to something watching, something that waits, not out of slumber, but out of design. Antarctica holds that stillness, a stillness not of death, but of containment. In 2023, a weather balloon launched from McMurdo Station unexpectedly rose higher than its programmed ceiling. For 7 hours, it transmitted temperature and pressure data as expected, until the feed began to show rhythmic fluctuations in atmospheric density. Not turbulence, not weather. A wave. When plotted, the pattern resembled a sine curve overlaid with a secondary pulse. Slower, deeper, layered beneath the wind. Some researchers thought it was instrument error. But one physicist noticed something else. The oscillation's frequency matched the sidereal rotation of Earth to within 0.0003%. It was as if the upper atmosphere, in that moment, was echoing the planet's own turning, or synchronizing with something else. No explanation was issued. But the question remained. What turns beneath us? We are used to movement we can measure, tectonic drift, molten churn, wind over snow. But we are less attuned to slow memory, the movement of knowing through matter, of resonance through time. And Antarctica, ancient and sealed, is perhaps the slowest memory of all. A continent shaped not by wind, but by withholding. Everything we've learned, every anomaly, every forbidden shape beneath the ice, points to the same unspoken possibility, that what sleeps there is not only structured, but aware. Not in the way we understand consciousness, but in a form older, colder, deeper. Consciousness as structure, consciousness as field, something that remembers not through thought, but through echo. And we, the forgetful species, draw near again. In 2024, satellite interferometry detected a sudden, localized uplift in the crust beneath Queen Maud Land. It lasted for 4 days, 4 centimeters. Then it ceased. Ice did not crack. There was no seismic activity, just motion. But motion toward what? If we accept that memory can be encoded in vibration, in pressure, in pattern, then that shift was not geological. It was a gesture, a stirring, as if the continent itself, beneath its glacial sleep, was shifting position, turning toward us, turning, or toward something we have become. There are ancient myths of places that vanish not because they are destroyed, but because they slip out of phase. The Irish speak of Tir na Nog, reachable only when the veil thins. The Japanese tell of High Brazil, visible only once every 7 years. In the Vedas, Shambhala emerges when consciousness reaches readiness. These are not lost cities. They are conditional realities. And perhaps Antarctica is one of them, a continent that does not hide, but waits for alignment, for the world to reach a particular frequency, for the great tuning fork to strike once more. A resynchronization, a return. And what returns with it? In the Gospel of Thomas, never canonized, never widely read, Jesus is quoted as saying, "If they say to you, the kingdom is in the sky, the birds will precede you. If they say it is in the sea, the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. A field, not a place, not a time, but a state." Perhaps Antarctica is not the gate. Perhaps it is the echo of that kingdom, the physical memory of a state of being long abandoned, a harmonic field left behind when humanity took a different path, one of rupture instead of resonance. We tell ourselves we are discovering, but at every turn we are remembering. And what we remember is not who we were, but who we could have been. Before the fall, before the flood, before the forgetting. Now we stand again at the threshold. The ice thins, the data converges, the dreams intensify, the mirrors begin to turn inward, and the question is no longer what is beneath the ice. The question is, what is awakening in us as we draw closer? Perhaps we are not meant to uncover it with instruments. Perhaps we are meant to remember it by frequency, by dream, by descent, because the true gate may not open in the ice. It may open in the mind, not suddenly, not loudly, but as a shift in resonance. A moment when the spiral within matches the spiral without. And memory returns not as knowledge, but as recognition, the recognition of shape, of tone, of purpose, the recognition that we are not alone, not because others arrive, but because something already here finally stirs in our direction and sees itself in us. And so, in this long echo of Earth's memory, across myth, stone, silence, and signal, we arrive at the threshold of the spiral. Not its end, but its innermost coil. And in that stillness, where no map can lead and no voice can explain, one final question waits, not to be answered, only to be heard. What if the ice is not what buries the truth, but what protects it until we become quiet enough to hear it without turning away?